It reminds me of that scene in The Grinch where he gives the kid the hacksaw and is like,
"Hey kids, here's a present for you. Be sure to run real fast with it now. Come on, double time, let's go, boom, boom, boom."
we were all just given the internet and had no idea how to use it, and they're like, oh, you'll be fine. It's this loaded gun of information.
If I think I'm one of the unbiased people, then all that means is that I haven't even started compensating for those biases that I have.
And then I got off Twitter in 2015, which was perfect timing because
Only in my darkest nightmares can I imagine what's happened to Twitter since 2016.
Whereas you should be responding and reflecting what's going on in the lives of the people you're actually physically and emotionally connected to. Your emotional and mental health becomes tethered to things out there that you have no control over.
I wish someone would have told me when I was 20 that the internet is not a real place.
this is the Lifted Spirits podcast, where we raise a glass, share encouraging thoughts and stories, and discuss how to find meaning through family, friendship, art, business, and everything in between. This is an episode I didn't even record for this podcast. We recorded it over 2 years ago in 2022, just for fun, and I thought it was worth recycling, putting on Lifted Spirits, even though we don't have any spirits technically on this episode. But it's a conversation with my brother and my good friend Anthony, and we cover topics like how to avoid the trap of media, always trying to pit people against one another, and how to cultivate more humility when interacting with people and topics, and logical fallacies and biases that we have when we approach information, and just how to be an overall more empathetic and nuanced human being. And since we recorded this a while ago, I knew even less about what I was doing, and two of the cameras died. So if you're watching on YouTube and wondering why there's like a 15-minute shot of only my face while other people are talking, that's why. Anyway, without any further ado.
So this is our video that we're making about how to internet, and it's not exclusively about the internet. It's more about media sensationalism and just people being so divided and argumentative and not seeing each other's viewpoints, and how to sort through information, and how to find reliable sources and things like that. And we've been talking about making this video for over a year, and finally decided to just sit down and do it. There's a few notes, but not much scripted, and we were all just sort of given the internet, as some of us as kids, and don't want to age you, but when did the internet like become prevalent for you?
Well, I can remember when you started seeing the first www addresses, URLs on like objects, like cereal boxes and stuff. I was like, that's curious. What is that? You know, how do you visit that? I remember when we heard about a friend who had email. So that I was probably about 12, 13 when that happened. It's relatively recent. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, we had internet when we were really young, but it wasn't not a whole lot of access, because it's like, what's on the internet?
Well, that's what I remember, those games on the cereal boxes, like visit our website to play this like silly little game to basically advertise to kids, pretty much cereal. But we could never do it because I feel like I don't think our internet was ever good enough to actually go there. So I remember never actually going to those places. So I feel like it was maybe like 9 or 10 before I was like, oh, the internet's a thing that I can use. And then it wasn't until, a few years after that before I like thought, I could actually use this for useful stuff, like looking up song lyrics, the most useful thing of the internet.
Yeah, and most of us were just given it at a relatively young age, and then just left to our own devices and given
No
so
pun
little.
intended.
That's pretty good. I didn't even.
My device was a Windows 95. That was my device.
Yeah, it reminds me of that scene in The Grinch where he gives the kid the hacksaw and is like, go run with this real fast. Like, we were all just given the internet and had no idea how to use it, and they're like, oh, you'll be fine. It's this loaded gun of information and good and bad. And so, yeah, I just thought we'd start with just information in general, maybe some stories of how the internet and misinformation has affected lives in negative ways, and I thought I'd start with a pretty extreme example. Not everything will be this extreme, but I had a friend who got so deep into conspiracy theories that it ended up he lost his job because of it, and that spiraled him into a depression, and he had a drug overdose and passed. And so it literally killed him. And so it's kind of a personal topic of like, not that you can just take that out on anybody that you think is wrong about something, but having like a grounded worldview is really important. And because how can we even agree on anything if we don't even have the same foundational reality that we're like having conversations about things? And so do y'all have any, I know we're wanting to protect discretion of people, so y'all can share or not share any stories of like friends or things. Y'all have anything or no?
Yeah, I've got some friends. I've got friends that I know that are some of my close friends that think or are into various things that I think are misinformation. And so I've kind of like looked into the issues a little bit just to like know it. But then it seems like every time I go there, I get deeper into, okay, how does like less of the specifics of this particular theory or this idea of history? It's like, how do these ideas come about? What are the methods that it happens? And that's where it seems to focus more and more. And then it seems like all of us, from a book that I read that was really good, all of us are like basically working on the best information we have. And I think there are better methods to refine the collection of information that you have to build your worldview out of. There's methods that produce more reliable results than others. And so I think that's kind of at the core of these issues. And so I've had a few friends that I've had a lot of conversations with. And it's been interesting because really I'm not super involved in worlds of misinformation. I'm not very active on the internet at all. And so without them, like I probably wouldn't have hardly any exposure to some of that world. Whereas I don't know if you guys' experiences are a little bit different. Just, I don't know. So, yeah.
Yeah, I've been trying to decide which story to tell. I'm going to try to tell this, like Andrew said, discreetly. I won't name the friend I have who's wrong about COVID, but like he's at the other end of the table. So I think you're probably wrong about a couple things, but yeah, and we're both still alive, so there's that. But I've known a number of different people, and I could probably create an interesting composite if I'd had time to think that up. But who just like I knew a good friend who spent massive amounts of time listening to Alex Jones, and every month or couple months he had like a new date when everything was going to go down, and what I saw was what I've often seen with people who are getting their information like from a very narrow swath of the internet that isn't well grounded in actual facts, is that they tend to like, you see a lot of emotional instability because the people that are generating this material are trying to move you often to buy products or something like that, or to vote for a certain political party or whatever it is at the time. I guess this is maybe a little bit separate from the issue of misinformation, but I think it's connected. The internet itself has a way of tethering you to things that are not actually relevant to you, tethering your emotions to things that aren't relevant to your real life. And so, whereas you should be responding and reflecting what's going on in the lives of the people you're actually physically and emotionally connected to, you end up, your emotional and mental health becomes tethered to things out there that you have no control over. And that's probably the biggest thing that I feel like is kind of a widespread harm that comes from people buying into unfounded conspiracies and internet misinformation.
And do y'all have an example of a time you remember just learning something new and changing your opinion on something, or having maybe shared something, whether online or with a friend, and then realize, oh, that wasn't true. I shouldn't have said that. I know that one for me is that, and this maybe sounds smaller, but kind of just looking more into it's a topic that touches so many other topics, but realizing that humanity and our common descent from like a common ancestor, and that evolution seems to be the most likely explanation of how humans came to be where we're at. Just learning more about that, it sort of touched so many topics for me, and in a way it was very confusing and discouraging to feel like a lot of what I'd grown up thinking was wrong or off, but then it was also like a big light that helped me understand so many things in the world too. Even simple things like maybe your kid who has cancer, it's not because like God has some plan for them. It's like that's just the thing that they were dealt by this way that the world's set up, and not that those conversations are mutually exclusive, but there's a lot of things that it's helped me process, and that was a bigger one for me to sort of shift my perspective, and was a several year course. You have a big one.
Biggie. It's kind of a similar thing, whereas I was like way into young earth creationism in high school and even into college. And I've since changed my mind about nearly every facet of that. Even it was like I feel like in high school and junior high I was all about it. And it was probably a case like you mentioned before of having like a narrow channel of information. It was just a bunch of videos from Kent Hovind, who recently got out of prison, which is great. Yeah. And so I got really into it in junior high and high school. And then I think in college, I stopped caring as much, but like I low key still mostly believed it. I just didn't give it much attention. And then really by the time college was over and after college, I was like, yeah, maybe like this young earth creationism thing and like the old earth creation view or any of those old earth day age theory, any of those. It's like God made it a long time ago or God made it 6,000 years ago. I'm like, either way, God made it. And so it ends up the same in my life today. And that's kind of where I was at for several years after that. And then now I've, changed lots of the ways I believe about things. And I'm like, wow, really all of the young earth creationism stuff, there's so many points that it just seems so flat out wrong. And like the only way to maintain those beliefs is to have a super narrow understanding of the world and a super narrow understanding of every scientific discipline. So I've kind of changed that because honestly, in a lot of ways now, I think the young earth belief in young earth creationism and that belief is like a more like crazy and out there conspiracy theory than almost anything. I'd probably even put it beyond flat earth in terms of credibility. That's my stance. I think we've talked about that before and maybe you think different, but I think it's just really flat earth is pretty out there, but it's only dealing with physics mostly, and young earth creationism is dealing with physics and chemistry and geology and evolution. So it's like it touches every discipline. So I have since changed my mind on that. So that's one of my big things that I've over time and over several years have done a pretty big about face on that, from hardcore into it to like now pretty hardcore against it.
Well, for me, and this is like the young earth thing, it's a really religiously charged topic, and it's it's maybe a different question from a religious perspective than it is from a secular perspective, but in either case, it kind of matters ethically. I grew up with the belief that the common belief among Protestant evangelicals that Israel has, a God-ordained right to the I guess the present boundaries of the state of Israel, and that the Palestinian peoples are just like fake claimants to that land who just, kind of a bunch of Arabs that showed up and wanted it and pretended that they had always lived there and that kind of thing. And that basically Israel's right to survive was religiously required if you're going to be a Christian, that the state of Israel was supporting the state of Israel was somehow inherently involved in believing God's promises to Abraham in the Bible and all of this, all of that. So, and I remember reading books that were written from that perspective. Actually, I think the one that made a really big impact on me was written by Jews, I think, not Christians, but just portraying the whole thing as Israel as this underdog who everyone was against. And by 1947, against all odds, they managed to win through and win themselves a homeland. And in that telling, the US, the UN, like Britain, they were all just against Israel's right to exist. And, it wasn't till a lot later that I read some other books. I read a book, just a very personal story from the Palestinian perspective. And it was by a guy who was actually a Christian Palestinian and who is pursuing reconciliation between Jews and Palestinians. It wasn't like an activist viewpoint, but it was such a completely different story. And the atrocities that were committed, just by the founders of the state of Israel, who for the most part were atheists, not the believing Jews we imagined, inherited the promises of Abraham, but that these people did some of the same kinds of atrocities that they had been subject to so recently that it's, what was happening in that country is more of a cycle of trauma than, good guys and bad guys. And so today, I've just come to a completely different view of that, and I see the situation with the state of Israel and their official treatment of the Palestinians as being an atrocity, completely divorced from anything that Christians believe in. And it was really uncomfortable when I first heard another viewpoint of that put forward by a Christian whom I respected. I was like, that can't be true. I hated every minute of I listened to this sermon, I think it was, and he was like talking about Israel and the promises and how they transfer. And it was just foreign. I had never been exposed to that viewpoint. And there's a lot of discomfort there. And of course, you don't change your mind on something like that overnight. It's a process, but yeah, you if you're open to change, you really can move a long ways. And I guess what we want to figure out is how to make sure that movement's in the right direction.
Yeah, I think some of the common things from these stories just now is like probably us having a pretty limited like understanding of a subject. And even if we don't have a full understanding of everything, we just like look at something from a pretty different perspective. And that might help average that view.
Yeah. Adding a perspective.
Yeah.
The common denominator.
Hey, Andrew here. And I wanted to say that of all the people who watch the podcast on YouTube, only 15% of those people are subscribed to the channel. And I never wanted to be one of those people who was like and subscribe, y'all. But yet here I am. If you would subscribe, it would help the channel immensely, because over time, the dream, my promise to you, if you subscribe, is to make the channel better. And not just make the channel better, but the dream is to have more in-person events one day where you're connecting with people who are also looking for meaning and have similar mindsets, and would like to do one as early as this year if possible. But please hit that subscribe button. Oh gosh, I'm a YouTuber now. Anyway, thanks. That's the thing that I feel like is most interesting to discuss and share with people, is the bigger picture of, kind of like you were saying, of, we could hone in on all these different topics and COVID and Israel and evolution and whatnot. But then, what are the ways that we are just misjudging the world to begin with, and what are rules that we even use in our personal lives to kind of keep us from making the same mistakes that we have before. And so for y'all, what are some ways that you see, both in personal experience and in culture, like you just see the divisiveness of topics and how things go from 0 to 100 really fast, and people seem, you're on this side or that side. What do you think can be done about that to help that?
I'm thinking one thing that I've noticed that at least gets people fired up is just the tone of the discussions. Um, and I mostly see this online because actually with the friends I was mentioning earlier, um, I guess there's been a couple, like a little bit more heated discussions we've had, but for the most part, it's been like fairly even keel. And maybe that takes just a really special like skill from everybody involved, to do. Um, but it's just like almost not like chopping off your emotions in that scenario, because it's like important to feel strongly about something, but know how to feel strongly about it, but not have it like just boiling out of your mouth as you're going and you're like so hyped, because then that comes across and that ups the ante for the other person. They kind of have to respond at the same level, or they're incentivized to respond at the same level, and it kind of escalates. So even if like one person in that debate is just like, okay, no, I gotta keep it down here. I just gotta let that pot simmer in the inside. I can't let it bubble over or whatever. And like, all right. And then even if the other person is a little more elevated, the first person doesn't respond quite as much, and it keeps the tone down. And then that prevents things from getting really wild and really exaggerated, from things blowing up.
Yeah, like Alexa and I, it's not even necessarily a rule that we have. It's part of it's just our nature kind of and personalities. But if people are having a conversation and talking over each other and like interrupting each other constantly, like we don't interrupt each other. We try not to interrupt other people, because it's like, what's the point of having a conversation? Because it seems like you're not going to get anywhere. And I'll listen to a lot of podcasts and YouTube videos, and it really bothers me. There's some people I even really like, but I'm like, man, you cut off people all the time, and then you're just, yeah, like it doesn't seem helpful. Like let someone share their point, and yeah, and you don't have to butt in, and that temptation to like, well, my opinion is really important and it needs to be said right now.
Yeah, maybe that having like longer form, like I guess debates, or a little bit more structured debates even, might be more helpful, rather than like a TV interview where it's just back and forth, or two friends bickering at each other. It's like, oh no, here's 3 minutes for you to make an argument in 3 minutes, and like, here, why don't you like respond to that? And that seems really robotic and super structured for just a normal conversation, but maybe that's like a method that could be used to let both people be heard and force somebody to sit there and process what the other person is saying.
Or better yet, like, here's 20 or 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Because some of those conversations or podcasts or debates online, those seem to be the most helpful, where it's not just the news segment where everyone's just shouting at each other for 3 minutes and then it's over and no one's accomplished anything, but where it's like, oh, okay, I actually had to sit and listen to what this person said, and I've pretty well just like cut out all non-long form things, and because it's just not helpful. And we have audiobooks now, and so if you want to learn about a topic, you don't watch a news clip for 3 minutes and then become an instant expert. And because even if you listen to an audiobook, you're not even close to an expert, but you at least, that's just like ground zero to have some baseline knowledge. And that's a big thing that I've learned for myself, is just that everyone has that one uncle who's instantly and conveniently an expert on whatever topic that happens to come up in some conversation, and so you don't want to be that guy who's like an expert on everything, and to know where your expertise is. And most people only have one or two expertises. Like, I do photo video stuff. I don't know if I'm an expert, but like, I know that world pretty well. I can talk about that with some kind of authority. But then when we're talking about pretty much any given topic in the news cycle, I am not an expert. And so even just acknowledging that doesn't mean I can't have a conversation or can't have an opinion, but realizing, okay, my opinion is, it's weighted. Like, it doesn't matter as much as an expert's on this topic.
Right, and it doesn't mean you can't make a meme about it.
Exactly.
You can always
Yeah.
about it.
Very true.
Just want to make sure we've got that clear. think, yeah, for me, the I think one thing that can be helpful. Well, a couple things. We just have to know that online communication it's stripped of a bunch of things that we really need to communicate well. I don't think it makes it's particularly helpful to say percentages or whatever of communication that's nonverbal or what. I don't know that anybody can actually quantify that, but what we know for sure is that we're extremely well adapted to being able to pick up nonverbal cues from each other and to be able to sense threat in proximity to someone. Like if you start getting riled about something that I'm saying here, I'm going to be able to feel it, and 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 we're constantly like adjusting our own engagement with other people based on what's coming back in real time, and most of that stops being accessible to us when we're in an online discussion. And so we're really we're really kind of handicapped, and I think that's one of the reasons they tend to not be productive. And another reason is maybe, and another way to reframe discussions that I think is very helpful, both in real life and online, is to try to move away from the debate mindset. The idea, like, debates can be helpful for certain purposes, but you can have a conversation from two different perspectives that doesn't exist in that paradigm. Like, that's not the only way to have a conversation with people that have different perspectives. You can come to a conversation with kind of the assumption that we're just going to each bounce our perspectives off each other and learn and riff and figure out what's true about what I think and what might be true about what you think. And we both expect to come out of this conversation understanding the topic better, even if we come from opposite perspectives on it. And that's like a really different, you're going to engage in a conversation differently. And it's hard to do that online because people assume that it's going to be a debate. If I have a different view, then this is about us, seeing who can crack the other one's skull, for the spectators. But
Which is immensely satisfying, but
Yeah.
has to be resisted.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's very much a gladiator sport. And so, yeah, but I think for me, that's been a reframing that, again, I've watched this done on Rebel Wisdom. It's a great podcast for that because there's a lot of emphasis on like collective sense making. And that's something that I think most of us have just barely even experienced, let alone tapped the potential of, where we sit together and we are really, really sensitive to not attacking the other person or their viewpoint. And we know that we disagree on major issues around this topic, but we're all exposing ourselves to the other perspective and expecting not to convince anyone that where I started was right, but rather that all of us that are in this conversation, and hopefully some people that are looking on, understand the topic better at the end of it.
As I watched a TED Talk that was about like soldier mindset versus scout mindset.
Yeah.
And it was like soldiers like, I'm entrenched and like in a war to try to like accomplish a goal, versus scout is like, we're just going to figure out where we're going. And I was like, that's a really cool way to frame it.
So yeah, you were talking about just having that goodwill towards people. And I think being playful and friendly is really important because it's so rare that a conversation actually needs to get heated and angry. There's a time and place for that, but it's pretty rare. And there's outrage culture, and that's what I don't like about a lot of the internet. There's several people that I appreciate a lot of the things they post online, but then I'm just really bothered by their attitude. Like, oh, you're so smug, and you're always picking a fight with somebody, and you're always making it like, oh, it's the Democrats, or it's the Republicans, or it's the this or the that, or there's always someone to blame, when we could be looking more at what our camp is doing wrong rather than focusing so much on what we think the other camp is doing wrong, and and learning and growing, because you'll see a lot of times someone confronted about some of their hypocrisy, and then they'll be like, well, but the Democrats did this, and you think that's not an argument. Like, can't you at least just admit you were wrong?
It's irrelevant.
And
We're talking about you.
yeah, and it's understandable. It's hard to have humility and to say, okay, yeah, I was wrong, but trying to just avoid that it's just not worthwhile. Like, you're not going to get anywhere if you're not going to learn and change opinions, and to not always be on the attack, like be more of a, I don't know if defensive is the right word, person, but
Just more self-reflective and less outwardly like activist or whatever.
And it's possible, like I had an interaction recently, it was very unusual for the internet. It was on Facebook, where I was having a discussion about something, doesn't matter what, with a guy. And it was one of those where, like, we were probably both holding back, trying to like wait and see how wrong the other guy is, and but all of a sudden this woman just dropped into the discussion out of the sky, and found out I creeped on her profile a little bit, and she was a sister to the guy I was already talking to, and just blasted me like ad hominem attacks. And well, I just replied, and I typed and deleted a couple times, like you do, but I eventually sent a fairly short and fairly sharp comment back, pretty much the same level, but basically just calling her out for doing ad hominem attacks, instead of having something of substance to add to the conversation. But not in a particularly kind way.
But I'm going to call you out for talking to strangers on the internet, because I think that's part of the problem.
Well, it is. The problem is, sometimes there are strangers on the internet and they all end up together at a place where they're not really strangers to the person that originally posted, and that kind of thing. You kind of end up in those conversations. But yes, I'd almost never, very rarely, only under extreme provocation, will I confront someone that hasn't reached out to me first if I don't already have a relationship with them. I don't drive-by comment anymore, unless it's just for fun. But and I used to get into drive-by arguments pretty often back in the day. But in this case, this was a drive-by from this other person, and I was like, wow, that was really something. Quite a lady you are. And she came back and commented yeah, you're right. That is what I did, and I'm kind of disappointed in myself. And I was like, impressive. This is an impressive level of emotional maturity for Facebook. And I don't remember if she private messaged me first or if I did her. Anyway, we have on and off been having a very high quality conversation off Facebook, and she kind of explained what the emotional background was for why that conversation triggered her so much, which is a really interesting thing to know. But normally we don't get past that surface level. And yeah, if we even can have the humility to step back, give ourselves some time in those conversations, and just kind of look at yourself from outside. Are these last three comments representing my core values or not?
Yeah.
I retract my calling out, because that's the way that the internet should work theoretically. As oh, you're actually having good interactions. It's just that happens so rarely that you want to give up. And that's kind of what I've more or less done. Is I used to get into a lot of internet debates, and then I tried to shift towards, okay, if people are being argumentative, reaching out to them and be like, hey, let's meet up, or let's talk on the phone and talk this through. And whereas now it's I just don't care about a lot of things enough to even go that far, so I just don't do much internet controversy anymore. But I think there are places. Are y'all on Twitter? I don't.
I'm technically on Twitter, but I almost never go there. And usually when I go there, I start looking at stuff and then I like really want to tweet and call people out. And it's like Twitter is toxic. So
Yeah, I was really active on Twitter from like 2012 or 2013 to like 2015, and then I got off, and which was perfect timing because I can only in my darkest nightmares can I imagine what's happened to Twitter since 2016. But I feel like there's certain spaces that should just be boycotted by everybody. Like I just don't see any good coming out of Twitter, and not that it's you can't blame everything on that, but it's like because it's kind of the opposite of the long form thing that we talked about. Like you're having conversations through fortune cookies. I've heard it put that way, and it's predominantly inflammatory stuff. It's never. Or not never, but it's rarely like an actual good dialogue. It's always calling somebody out in however many characters they have now, and
240, is that what it is?
yeah, beats me. But
Anyway,
I think there's a lot of places like that people should just say, I'm done. Yeah.
If you're, I think that need to like be really fast and really brief really does degrade conversations, and it pushes it toward that kind of conversation, because how are you going to make an impression in that many characters?
And it's a drug. Like there was so much dopamine from like arguing with people that not everybody gets that kick, but then I definitely got it back in the day, and it was hard to,
your friends are reacting like
Yeah.
and boosting you, and then
Yeah, it feeds off of itself. And it's like there's like a big desire to like have your opinion heard. There's a big desire to have like special knowledge of something that you want to share to somebody else. And like those are all things that trigger like dopamine responses, and we all like feel good when we're like explaining something we really believe in to somebody else. And so getting in spaces like that where it's like unfiltered raw, this is what I think in 20, I guess it's filtered heavily by only 240 characters, but it gets everybody engaged, but nobody's having anything productive to say.
nobody's getting any smarter.
Yeah, and that's why we've come back to long form stuff. It's a Reddit post that I've wanted to make, but I've just never got to. But that long form scripted media is a much better way to consume information about the world than short form or unscripted media. So that's like documentaries and even movies to kind of an extent, books, like even Wikipedia pages, like where it's all written out, even though it's like, the whole thing with Wikipedia, but it's like a great place to start. Whereas like even a podcast, even if it's a person on a podcast talking with an expert who wrote a book about something, I'd still say it's far more valuable to read that expert's book than it is to listen to this podcast. And I think that works so much better because it's like, okay, this person like is still talking and he knows a lot of things, but it might come out wrong, or it might like, he might forget about some information. It's like, or you could read his book where it's like, he's probably spent years developing this and putting together exactly what he wants to say. And so it's like the highest level of information. And so even then I'd say like that's better than even long form podcasts, but long form debates are probably like in between there is better, but having shorter form debates or news debates, like those are like, oh, this is not very good. And then to the far extreme of just Twitter posts, it's like, that's on the far extreme of like, this is really just pretty much worthless, and much more hurtful and bad for everybody than basically everything else on the spectrum. So.
And there's a lot of logical fallacies we run into, which I don't really like the term logical fallacy because it sounds really philosophical or something, when it's like these are very everyday matters of just interacting with people. But what are some, or actually some that come to mind, like the Dunning-Kruger effect? Y'all should just explain that some and what it is. And
like the less you know about something, whenever you know nothing about something, your confidence is high, and then you learn more, and then your confidence drops pretty sharply until you know like a little and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know anything about this. And then you keep learning about it. And then that confidence level kind of goes back up to where you're like the expert. So like a lot of people know like little overall about a subject are a lot more vocal and a lot believe things more strongly until you learn more about the world and learn how complicated things are. And you're like, well, then you start questioning things and then that confidence drops a lot. And so a lot of social media promotes in a lot of senses the people that have like the most vigorous thing to say, which a lot of times ends up being people that have less knowledge about different subjects. That's kind of my explanation, the Dunning-Kruger, if that's...
Yeah, if I'm going to describe the Dunning, if I'm, my understanding of the Dunning-Kruger effect puts me kind of right there at that little peak, because that's about how well I understand. I feel really confident that I know what we're talking about, but...
Well, I used to, for a long time, I legitimately thought it was the Diane Kruger effect.
Okay.
But it's the Dunning.
And you were out there telling everybody about it, right?
Check out this Diane-Kruger effect.
You've got it.
It's a logical fallacy. She was also great in Inglourious Basterds.
Anyway, the Dunning-Kruger effect is really important to know about yourself. Like, it's an important thing to know. Like, if I feel really confident about something that I haven't really dug into deeply, I probably am making a fool of myself. But also, it's a good it's a good frame to understand how to filter opinions that you encounter, because if you expose yourself to information from true experts, like lifelong career people who have studied a topic and who are not activists for some cause or other, which kind of poisons their view of the topic often. If you just find someone who just cares about a subject and really understands it well, and you read a book by that person, you'll find over and over, usually, they'll be saying, here's something we just don't know the answer to. Why does this work this way? We don't know. We're going to have to find out more about that. And you'll find that with experts. There's lots, and they're free to say what they don't know. If you find someone for whom every topic they discuss is really simple and straightforward, hey, here's what's going on, and anyone who has a different viewpoint, they refer to as stupid or, obviously evil, everyone but them has an ulterior motive, then like that person is probably subject to the Dunning-Kruger effect, or they're an expert who's hired to lie to you. So if someone is presenting particularly a big topic with a lot of moving parts, like say COVID, in a very simplistic manner, they're probably going to do you more harm than good listening to them.
And I saw it was technically a debate, but kind of like you were saying, it was more just a conversation between people. And something that I thought was really good, because there's the straw manning people where you just make a really weak argument, and that's sort of poking fun and not taking seriously what the other people are saying. But then they had them they call it steel manning there.
Yeah.
And
that was the Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris debates.
Yeah, I think it was. And they made them say, okay, this person that you disagree with, state what they're trying to say in the strongest possible terms, like if you were trying to convince the audience. And that way and then the person can even respond and say like, okay, yeah, that's more or less what I'm trying to say, as opposed to, no, that's totally misrepresenting. And it shows that you actually have an understanding of what they're trying to say, and you're not just like attacking something that doesn't exist.
Yeah, I think if more people got involved in debate in high school or whatever, I feel like that would resolve a lot of issues. It's just because it's like, okay, here's some random topic that doesn't matter. You have this side, you have that side. And then it's like, oh, I have to pick a side and defend it. And then you do that. And then it's like, all right, now switch. You have to argue the other side. And you're like, oh gosh. And then you start thinking like, well, now I have a full argument of both things. And then it's even more exaggerated when it's a topic you do care about, or you do have preconceived, like stronger opinions on, and you're assigned. It's like, okay, defend this other side. And maybe the teacher doesn't even know that you hold these beliefs. It's just like, defend this side. That's your assignment. And then you have to defend the other side. That really, I feel like that is a great tool to get you thinking from a perspective that you might not even support. Even if you win, you could win the debate and hold none of those views. I'm like, that's a good skill.
Yeah, and you talking about like, oh, this topic that may or may not matter. Another thing I remember that I wanted to talk some about is that another issue is just needing to be like be an advocate for every cause, like feeling like everything we need to have a really strong opinion about, and just picking battles more carefully and not having to care about everything that comes into the news cycle every 2 or 3 days, and because it gets exhausting uh, to have to feel like you even have to look into all this stuff, and then you do your 20 minutes of online reading, and then now you're an expert and you're going to share your opinion and just make all the problem worse by fanning the flames of something ignorantly. So yeah, just not being baited is easy by all the things that people want us to fight about.
Mm-hmm. It helps to unplug a little bit. I feel like so many of the problems in debates, it's like I learn about afterwards whenever it like has hit Facebook, and then several days later I've checked Facebook. It's like, oh, apparently some big thing happened in the news last week and everybody's outraged about it. Of course, then it turns into me like right now, like, oh my gosh, I just found out the Olympics started. It's like last week or something. Like, oh, I totally forgot that the Olympics were happening.
And then it's too late to have an opinion about it.
I know. It's like, I can't even tell you if I believe that Tokyo handled the opening ceremony well or not. It's like, oh, I guess I'm too late for this. Looks like I won't have to engage here.
Yeah.
So it's a win. It's a win for me.
You had mentioned ad hominem, which is a fancy word for just like attacking someone's character.
Yeah.
And that happens on news segments all the time. And yeah, where it's just totally unnecessary to call someone out. And when you can, like, if someone's calling you out, that's a really good opportunity to listen and learn. And I remember someone telling me once that you're only offended by something like a criticism of yourself if it's true. Like if it's not true,
Or if it's somewhere close
yeah,
in the neighborhood.
yeah, like if you know something's not true about yourself, you don't have to get all riled up.
Easy to shrug off.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And so you should be able to be confident. And then on the flip side, you can consider what people are saying of like, oh, maybe they have a point. Maybe I should be a little more this or a little less that. And what's the harm in yeah, having some humility and rethinking some things.
I think humility is a big one. I also read a book called Being Wrong. It was like subtitles like Adventures in the Space of like Incorrectness or something. And it's like, it looked at the process that people go through when they're wrong about something, and just did a big study about what is it like being wrong? What are all the different things that happen? Like, what are the things that you feel when you find out you're wrong? And it was really interesting. I'm like, this helps me have more humility because I know what the process is. And maybe like over the course of life, I've just figured out how to be humble about stuff and just like, yeah, they said this thing and I think it's not true, but I'm just going to move on. Or like they said this thing and it is true and I'm like, I'm ashamed of that or something like that. And so if more people like, yeah, kick into, if they're being like kind of not attacked, but have something like vulnerable pushed at them, shifting into like, oh my gosh, what if they're right? Like, and doing the self-reflection thing versus the knee-jerk reaction, which is to reply and attack back. And I think that would help untangle the tension that's happening, and just kind of like bring things back down and have more people look inward for problems in themselves rather than always being trying to fix every other problem out there.
And we're all super curious people, so I think a lot of people, this doesn't come by nature, but just listening to a wide variety of people on topics, a lot of people are very much stuck in one little bubble of whatever circle it may be, and rarely, if they're listening to anything about someone else, it's some sort of critique rather than, okay, I'm going to sit down, this person that I don't like, I'm going to read one of their books or listen to some of their podcasts and see what they actually have to say. And then I could end up thinking all the exact things and disagreeing about all the same things, but you've recognized, okay, but this is actually an articulate person who's intelligent and I disagree with, and you don't dehumanize them so much and talk about them like they're an idiot.
Yeah. another thing on that topic is that I find people is not universally known, is that search engines like Google, as well as social networks, your news feed is curated by algorithms, so that shows you more of what you have shown an interest in already, which tends to narrow the range of viewpoints you have. Search engines do this too, and it seems like there are fewer people who are aware of that if you're logged into your Google account and you haven't told Google, don't track my search history, then your search results are your personal search results. They're different from what anyone else is going to see, and they're curated to what Google thinks you're interested in, what your viewpoints are. So if you search some hot topic in the news, if I search some hot topic in the news while logged into my Google account and they have this history of everything I've searched for the last 5 years and read, I'm going to see, pages of results that all confirm my pre-existing biases. Whereas someone with the opposite viewpoint is going to have the same thing happen to them. And if you think that this is just a list of this is like a library of information, general information on the topic, you encounter that sometimes online where somebody's like, just go look it up. Anybody knows this is true. And because they go search it on Google and there is no information from any other perspective. So look into search bubbles if you're interested in solving this problem. I tell people I use DuckDuckGo myself, but there are other search engines that don't create that bubble effect. A search engine that doesn't keep a history, that doesn't personalize your results, will give you more opportunities just in the process of searching out a subject to run into things that you don't expect to see. But another thing that we can just do, like a couple of you have said it already, but it also helps to solve this problem of bubbles, is it's harder to create a curated group of peers that all agree with you in the real world than it is online. And so likely most of us have family members that disagree with us on fairly fundamental issues. And we have to see those people and interact with them. Like if we're decent humans at all, we still try to keep interacting. And so there's always that friction. And you have that opportunity to have the things that I believe attacked and questioned and threatened. And that's a good thing, not a bad thing. So yeah, just the more we engage with people in the real world, rather than online about important issues, the more likely we are to broaden.
Yeah, and it's a good way to also practice like having a constructive argument and to like not get all in a tizzy and all like
right.
that. Besides having your own beliefs question all that, it's a good practice to just talk with somebody and try to be like, I'm just going to listen to what he has to say.
And the costs of not doing that are much more immediate and painful if you fail at it in the real world.
And we were talking about this before we started recording, and I can clarify what I meant. But to the audience, whoever's listening, I wish someone would have told me when I was 20 that the internet is not a real place. Like, I know there's like real people behind the screens, but you're almost like taking on a persona. Like it's not even you on the internet, really.
It's like a different reality that you like take off the reality that we know and we live in. It's like, okay, now I'm putting on the rules of the internet, and you have to become like a different kind of person on the internet.
Yeah, and I think the internet could become a far more real place, like if people can have some maturity and learn more things about it, but just in general, so much of the negativity, it's like, yeah, like why did I argue with people for months on Twitter that I never met and had no idea who they were? Like what good does that really do in the world? And like that's not really a real interaction. And I'm trying to use the internet as a means to materialize like actual real relationships. Like I've done some little experiments with private Facebook groups of whether it's for like a film club or something, and inviting people that I know to be a part of that, who I can see and invite to things in real life. And then you can kind of combine your online world with your real world, or even a conversation Facebook group that's not just open to the public where random person from who knows where, your aunt that you haven't seen in a decade's commenting on everything and being disagreeing with stuff, but it's like, okay, here's 20 people that I know personally and enjoy, and I'm going to put out a post to them and see what they think about this. And so yeah, those are just some practical things that I feel like have been helpful for me.
And your mileage may vary, but I've had really good results with meeting people in real life that I met on the internet.
You're good at that, so I do appreciate that.
It's like online dating.
So yeah, the there's another principle that came to mind when I was thinking about that we're going to have this conversation is the idea of bias, like just embracing the idea that I'm a biased person. Every person has a whole range of cognitive biases that are largely invisible to us, that affect the way we perceive, cause us to perceive the same evidence, the same data in a different way than someone else does. And there seems to be a fairly widespread idea that there in the world that there are biased people and unbiased people. And if I think I'm one of the unbiased people, then all that means is that I haven't even started compensating for those biases that I have. I don't even know they exist. Like, I'm basically a child as far as the ability to process life. So if I'm looking through a lens at things that makes there be like 10 of everybody's face and it's all blue tinted, I can manage okay in the world if I know that that's what I'm doing. If I know that what the lens is like and what it's doing to what I'm seeing. But if I don't know it's even there, and I just think there's 10 of you, like, I'm going to have some very big problems. And that's the way biases are. Like, you can compensate for your bias to a certain degree. I can compensate for my known biases. And this is another place where the help of other people is really important, because like, none of us is smart enough to solve all these fallacies and biases by ourselves. But other people will tell you when you're biased in certain ways, and often not very kindly. And so that's an opportunity to say, okay, I must kind of see the world this way. And I can start like mentally, shifting the hue of everything I see to adjust for my biases.
I think knowing, like, even if it's just the names of the biases and like a one line about what it is, even if you don't remember that over the long term, but just like knowing the common ones and being able to name them helps you like see it. It's like the whole thing with, if you want to reduce something, like reduce inefficiency in a business or reduce the amount of sugar you eat, a lot of times all you have to do is start measuring it. You don't have to consciously make any changes, just measure it. And that in itself will like make you be thinking about it more, which kind of makes you do it less or makes you be more efficient in itself. So just the ability to know some of the logical fallacies and cognitive biases and all this stuff lets you be able to identify it more and prevents you, in theory, from falling prey to it as often. So,
are there some particular biases that you've come across that you've realized you're more disposed to?
I don't know if I'd like rank, or if I could like rank them if I'm like more disposed to them necessarily, because I think it's all just kind of things that everybody does. So I guess I can't think of any. One that I was like reading about last night on my notes of stuff that I thought was interesting was the proportionality bias, where it's like they gave the example. It's like, okay, in 1970 or whatever, a bird flew, like happened to go into a jet engine in an airplane, and then the jet had to like emergency land, and it emergency landed, and then it crashed, and everyone was killed, and immediately conspiracy theories went up, and it was all crazy, like, oh, everybody's speculating what happened because something major just happened, and a lot of people died. But for the in 2012 or whatever, whenever the bird hit an engine of an airplane and they had to crash land, and they landed in the Hudson River, there were hardly any conspiracy theories that happened because of that, because the consequences of that thing were not as big. And so people didn't try to match the proportion of it with something else. And it was the same with the JFK assassination and the Reagan assassination attempt, because Reagan didn't die. They're like, oh yeah, it's just some random person that wanted to kill him. But for JFK, he did die, so it's like there must have been something crazy going on.
Yeah.
And so even it must have been. I mean, even if there was, let's say, just knowing about it, it's like, okay, it's like you can compensate for that bias. Like, okay, there's still like probably a very, similar chance just from that information that, these are probably equal scenarios. It's just one thing had something much bigger happen, so you're more likely to think there's some big cause behind it. Whereas like, well, maybe it was also just chance. Maybe it was just a random person.
The JFK thing reminded me of this lady I was doing a job for. She said at one point, she was like, I want to share some things with you, but I don't know if you're ready for them. And in my mind, I thought, oh no, here we go. But I let her share her stuff, and she was talking about how all these people have gotten, all these big political figures have gotten facial reconstruction surgery, and how it might have been JFK is still alive, someone like that, and that Obama's a part of this cult thing. And she told me this whole thing, and my response now to people who are into that kind of thing, I ask her, what would you like me to do with this information? Because I'm like a very practical person. Like, even if this is true, what do these things change? And so that's just another perspective.
That kind of ties into Stoic philosophy a little bit of like focusing on how you can control your life. And if there's anything that is outside of your control, then why worry about it?
Yeah. I wrote down, like, this is kind of like my final word, basically. I just thought, what are a few good rules about all this that I try to live by? And it's a lot of the stuff that we talked about, but I'll just kind of cover them real quick. One is that the world is a big place, and there's a near infinite amount of things you don't know, so have some humility, the sort of Dunning-Kruger thing. 2, give people you disagree with the benefit of the doubt and try to understand where they're coming from, and don't stoop so quickly to the level of character attacks, and to keep playful and friendly for the most part, because there's no reason not to be. And 3, with people you disagree with, focus more on what they have right and what you might have wrong than what you think you have right and what they might have wrong, because it's an opportunity to learn and become better. And 4, drift towards the long form formats of audiobooks and books and podcasts, long form podcasts.
You can read books.
Yeah, books are allowed. Not new sound bites. And with that, like, trying to do your best to find somewhat reliable sources of information, whichever, that's up to debate for everybody. But I think at this point in history, surely we can all agree that, like, Twitter and CNN and Fox, like, it doesn't matter if you're liberal or conservative, like, those news networks are really, I don't know, inflammatory, and that it's better to try to find even experts, like, rather than listening to what they have to say about COVID, actually reading some doctor's papers or something, or, things like that, and just find reputable experts, because there's only so much you can know. So, like, try to trust the experts, which is another really loaded phrase, because it's not like experts are always right, but they're definitely probably more right than you, like 99% of a chance that someone who's devoted their life to something has a better understanding of it than you do. So those are just a few last little thoughts I had. Did you all have any, even if they're just off the top of your head, just like recap or bullet points of rules that help you in day-to-day life?
Yeah, I agree with definitely the humility thing, where it's like, hey, learn to be wrong and learn to be okay with it, because we're all there. And ultimately, you start looking like an idiot if you can't do that. So that helps, is just learn how to be wrong, and learn how to be wrong kind of gracefully, I guess. Same with the long form media thing, is develop your skills to be able to read books. Even though I say that and I haven't read like a real book with my eyeballs in like a couple years, but I've cranked through like 50 audiobooks a year. So I count audiobooks as okay, but get more on board with long form media, watch documentaries about the world, just have a wide variety. Go out of your way to find somebody you completely disagree with and really try to understand their perspective. I think that's a good one.
I don't have a lot to add to the ground you guys covered, but I think you can't emphasize humility too much. It's just like there's a reason that's one of the virtues that pretty much all spiritual perspectives always emphasize, because it's not so much an issue of morality as it is an issue of living in the world effectively. Humility is what allows you to update your maps of reality, and you don't need to have the map for me is a really important metaphor. So think of your life as a map, or of the world, the universe, everything there is to be known as a map. I only need an accurate map for the places I'm going to be. But if my map of the places I actually have to navigate to is wrong, and like I look at my map of what I think my world is, and I head off based on that in a direction, I don't end up where I wanted to be. That can have really catastrophic consequences for my life. So, and we all start out with almost nothing filled in, and that's one reason everybody loves children, because they know they don't know everything, and they're willing to learn. And we just need to stay that way. And the other thing is that we have a really, really, we need to get rid of the false idea that I'm responsible to apprehend truth on my own. That's simply not possible. That's a collective endeavor, and we're not designed at all to understand the world without access to other people's minds and perspectives. And in general, those perspectives will be how valuable the other people's perspectives are will be proportional to how much they differ from my own. The more someone thinks like I do, the more comfortable it is for me to discuss a topic with them, probably the less useful it is to do that. And that leads to probably the other thing I want to say is that this is really a matter of courage. Humility requires courage because it hurts to change our minds. It hurts to admit that I'm wrong. It's not a comfortable feeling. It's probably one of the highest levels of emotional pain that we're called on to routinely encounter. But it's absolutely essential. So we need to stop being cowards about admitting that my view of something important could be wrong, and just lean into that and go, this is life. This is a pain that has an immense payoff.
Yeah, well, if you've listened this far, thanks for giving us the time of day, and hopefully
mash that subscribe button.
Yeah, like and subscribe.
Yeah, I don't know if I'll put this on.
Check out his website.
Yeah, my YouTube channel. I think I got like 9 subscribers. That's hopefully, if y'all are still listening, this has been somewhat informative and giving you some good tips on how to interact with information and the internet and other people, and just have better relationships in general. So thanks for listening.